There's something powerful about that line because it doesn't reject belief, it simply demands honesty from it. The idea that if you're going to make a claim about reality, especially one that shapes how billions live and die, it should hold up when tested against reason. Yet religion has always existed in a space where reason is optional, where logic is suspended the moment faith walks in. It's remarkable how many claims sound profound when spoken in a temple or a church, but collapse under the smallest bit of scrutiny. The kind of statements that, when you really think about them, push you away from faith entirely, not because of anger, but because of clarity. Because once you stop accepting just believe as an answer, you start seeing how absurd some of these claims really are. Take the idea that an all-powerful, all-loving being created humans, knowing most of them would end up suffering eternally. This is presented as an act of divine love, yet no parent would deliberately bring a child into the world knowing they'll suffer forever. The contradiction is so blatant that the only way it survives is by discouraging questions. And when you ask those questions, the response is often to blame the questioner, not the logic, or consider the claim that a deity is timeless and perfect, yet constantly demands worship, praise, and obedience. If perfection means lacking nothing, why would a God crave acknowledgement? Why would an infinite being care whether finite creatures sing to it every week? The idea sounds noble when framed as devotion, but when you strip away the ceremony, it resembles emotional manipulation. Religious stories often mix moral lessons with cosmic absurdities. A talking serpent convinces two naive humans to eat a fruit that curses all of humanity. A global flood wipes out nearly everyone because their ancestors displeased the Creator. A man is swallowed by a fish and survives 3 days inside. These aren't harmless fables when they're treated as history. They become the foundation for moral laws, social hierarchies, and even political power. And then there's prayer. Billions of people believe that by speaking in their heads or whispering to the sky, they can influence the universe. Yet every natural disaster, every famine, every child dying in pain raises the same question. If prayer works, why do these things continue? The usual answer is God's plan, which conveniently explains everything and nothing at the same time. It's an idea designed to be unfalsifiable. Religious claims thrive on this kind of vagueness. The moment you demand clear definitions, they start dissolving. Heaven is said to be perfect joy, but no one can describe what that means. Hell is endless punishment, but no one explains why eternal torment is justice for finite mistakes. The soul is supposedly the real you, yet no one can say where it exists, how it interacts with the brain, or why brain damage can change personality if the soul is what truly defines us. Even the origin stories offered by religion often read like they were written by people trying to explain the world before they understood it. Ancient texts confidently declare that the earth was created in a few days, that stars are lights set in a dome above us, that diseases come from spirits or curses. These might have made sense thousands of years ago, but they crumble next to modern science. And instead of admitting error, religions twist themselves to reinterpret the text in whatever way aligns with new discoveries. But some claims are not just wrong, but deeply revealing about human psychology. The idea that we are born sinners for something our ancestors supposedly did. It's not just a myth, and it's a guilt mechanism. It ensures people feel broken from birth, so they'll need the institution that claims to fix them. The logic is as transparent as it is effective. Convince people they're sick, then sell them the cure. You also hear the claim that morality comes from religion, that without belief, people would have no reason to be good. But morality predates organized religion, and we see it in every social species that thrives on cooperation. Compassion, fairness, and empathy evolved because they helped us survive as groups. You don't need a divine command to care for someone in pain. And if the only reason to be moral is fear of punishment, that's not morality. It's obedience. Religious claims often turn natural emotions into cosmic currency. Suffering becomes a test. Tragedy becomes God's will. Joy becomes a blessing. Everything is rebranded so that no matter what happens, It reinforces belief. When something good occurs, it's divine favor. When something awful happens, it's divine mystery. Heads they win, tails you lose. Then there's the claim that sacred texts are divinely inspired, yet these texts are full of contradictions, errors, and moral teachings that no sane person would defend today. Rules endorsing slavery, misogyny, and violence, passages where God commands genocide or punishes children for their parents' sins. If these are the words of a perfect being, what does imperfection even mean? Some believers argue that those parts should be understood in context. But context doesn't make murder moral or slavery sacred. If morality depends on reinterpretation every generation, then the book isn't guiding us, we're guiding the book. And what about miracles? Claims of water turning into wine, seas parting, the dead rising, or prophets flying to heaven. These were extraordinary claims made by people with no understanding of physics or medicine. Today, when we actually have tools to verify such things, miracles vanish into stories, hearsay, or personal experiences. Not one survives a controlled test. There's also the claim that the universe was fine-tuned for life, as if everything was calibrated for our benefit, but life adapted to the universe, not the other way around. The vast majority of the cosmos is lethal to us. Trillions of stars, endless radiation, frozen voids, black holes, and yet we live on a thin crust around one average star on one planet in one galaxy. The arrogance of calling that fine-tuned for us is staggering. Religious claims often confuse emotional comfort with truth. Just because an idea feels good doesn't make it real. The thought of seeing loved ones again after death is comforting, but comfort doesn't create evidence. If something were true simply because it feels nice, every fairy tale would be fact. And that's the strange thing. Religion asks for belief before evidence. It tells you that doubt is a weakness, curiosity is dangerous, and faith is a virtue. But belief without evidence isn't a virtue, it's a shortcut. It's surrendering your responsibility to think critically. What's fascinating is how often religious claims adapt to survive. When science disproves one idea, religion moves the goalposts. The earth isn't the center of the universe anymore, then maybe humans are still spiritually central. Evolution explains life's diversity, then God must have guided evolution. The flood didn't happen. Maybe it was symbolic. The story changes, but the demand for belief stays the same. These are the cracks where faith starts to fade. Not because someone wants to reject it, but because once you see how fragile these claims are, belief stops feeling like an act of loyalty and starts feeling like denial. At some point, you start noticing that almost every religious claim has to be protected from questioning. It's as if belief is a delicate object that can't survive being handled. The irony is that truth doesn't fear investigation. It welcomes it. But religion builds walls around its claims, warning people that doubt is dangerous or that asking too much means you've lost faith. It's a clever system. If you question it, you're the problem. One of the most curious claims is that divine justice will correct what life doesn't, that wrongs will be righted, and every soul will get what it deserves after death. It sounds comforting, but it's also a convenient way to avoid accountability. If people believe that real justice happens in another world, they'll tolerate injustice in this one. It's how religion has often pacified the oppressed, telling them their suffering is temporary and their reward is coming later. Meanwhile, the powerful enjoy comfort and call it blessing. Then there's the idea that faith itself is a kind of evidence, as if believing really hard somehow makes something more likely to be true. You'll hear lines like, "I know it's real because I feel it." But feelings aren't facts. They're responses to thoughts, not confirmations of them. People can feel the presence of a god, a ghost, or even a loved one who's gone. It's the same human brain doing what it's evolved to do, finding patterns, creating meaning, and filling silence with voices it wants to hear. Religious experiences are often described as proof that the divine exists. People see visions, feel warmth, hear whispers, but we now understand how easily the mind can produce those sensations. Hallucinations, sleep paralysis, fasting, emotional stress, all can generate vivid spiritual experiences. Ancient people didn't know that, so they assumed it must be external. Today, we can watch it happen in brain scans. What was once called a revelation is now understood as a glitch in perception. Even the claim that religion gives life meaning doesn't hold up when examined closely. Meaning isn't handed down, it's created. You don't need a cosmic plan to find purpose in love, learning, or kindness. In fact, the idea that life only has meaning if someone else gives it to you is a kind of dependence. It's like saying a painting only matters if the artist explains it. But meaning isn't something you receive, it's something you make. Some claims are so contradictory, they almost expose themselves. You'll hear that God loves everyone unconditionally, yet also that disbelief earns eternal torture. That free will is sacred, yet God already knows every decision you'll ever make. That the universe was made for us, yet we're constantly reminded how insignificant we are compared to its vastness. These contradictions aren't small, they're structural. They reveal a belief system built on emotional comfort rather than logical consistency. Religions also make bold claims about morality, yet their moral teachings often change depending on culture or era. A few hundred years ago, slavery was defended with scripture. Women were treated as property because the holy text said so. Wars were fought in the name of peace, and when those ideas became indefensible, religion simply rebranded. It didn't lead moral progress, it followed it. The moral growth we celebrate today happened not because of divine revelation, but because humans questioned it. Another claim that falls apart is that faith brings people together. It does, but only within its own walls. Between walls, it divides. Every religion claims to have the truth, which automatically means everyone else is wrong. That's not unity. That's tribalism with hymns. The world's bloodiest conflicts, from crusades to jihads, were justified by people convinced they had divine approval. Even today, wars, discrimination, and persecution often hide behind religious slogans about peace and love. Some say that without religion, people would have no moral compass, but look at where morality is strongest. Usually in the most secular societies, nations with low levels of religious belief tend to have lower crime rates, better education, and stronger social safety nets. Meanwhile, countries where religion dominates often struggle with inequality, corruption, and repression. That's not coincidence. It's evidence that morality doesn't depend on belief in gods. It depends on empathy and reason. You also hear that miracles prove the truth of faith, but most miracles only happen where people already believe. You never see amputated limbs regrow, diseases vanish on live television, or mountains move. Instead, it's always something that can be explained by coincidence, placebo, or misinterpretation. The standards for evidence drop drastically when belief is involved. A strange light in the sky becomes an angel. An unexpected recovery becomes divine intervention. Yet when you remove the religious filter, these events look like what they are: natural phenomena misunderstood by emotional observers. Another claim that pushes people toward disbelief is the idea that suffering has divine purpose. The claim goes that every tragedy is part of a larger plan, but that explanation falls apart the moment you think of unnecessary pain. Children dying of diseases, animals suffering in nature, disasters wiping out entire families. What purpose could possibly justify that? The mystery excuse doesn't solve the problem, it just hides it. If a God's plan includes endless suffering, calling it good doesn't make it so. Then there's the claim that the scriptures are historically reliable, yet archaeology and historical records constantly contradict them. There's no evidence of millions of Israelites wandering the desert for 40 years. No record of a worldwide flood, no contemporary accounts of the miracles described in the Gospels. The deeper scholars dig, the more they find that religious texts are human creations, filled with politics, folklore, and moral allegories, not divine dictation. And still, people cling to these claims, not because they're convincing, but because belief fulfills emotional needs. It gives comfort in chaos, belonging in isolation, and certainty in uncertainty. That's the real power of religion. It doesn't convince the intellect, it soothes the anxiety. The problem is, comfort and truth don't always align. A comforting story can keep you calm, but it can also keep you blind. Like one of the most revealing claims is that without God, life is meaningless. But that's just projection. Like it's the fear of a mind raised on dependency, suddenly realizing the world doesn't revolve around it. The absence of cosmic supervision isn't despair, it's freedom. It means your choices actually matter because they're yours. It means you can create purpose without waiting for permission. Religious claims often turn ignorance into mystery. When people didn't understand the weather, it was God's mood. When they didn't understand disease, it was punishment. When they didn't understand death, it became a doorway. Step by step, science replaced superstition with understanding, and every time religion retreated to smaller and smaller gaps. Now those gaps are psychological, not physical. The God of the gaps lives wherever knowledge hasn't reached yet, but knowledge keeps moving. That's why the strongest antidote to religious claims isn't ridicule, it's curiosity. Once you start asking why, belief becomes unstable because the answers rarely stand up to their own logic. A perfect, omniscient being doesn't make flawed creatures and then blame them for acting flawed. An eternal paradise doesn't make sense if free will can't exist there, and a just God wouldn't demand belief under threat of eternal pain. These aren't deep mysteries, they're contradictions disguised as reverence. When you strip away the rituals, the dogma, the emotional weight, religion reveals itself as a collection of human attempts to make sense of the unknown. Understandable in context, but outdated now that we've grown past needing myths to explain lightning or death. What once helped us survive now holds us back from understanding the universe as it is. And that's the realization that quietly shifts people away from faith, not because they hate religion, but because they outgrow it. They start to see that truth doesn't need protection, and logic doesn't need fear, and morality doesn't need a middleman. It's strange how, once you step outside belief, everything that once seemed profound suddenly looks transparent. The contradictions that used to feel mysterious start to feel like excuses. The more you look, the more you realize how religion survives not by proving its claims, but by making them impossible to disprove. It's a system built on emotional reinforcement, not evidence. Take the claim that God answers prayers in His own way. It's designed so that no outcome can challenge it. If you pray and get what you want, that's proof. If you don't, that's still proof because God knows best. No matter the result, the belief always wins. It's the perfect circular logic, one that guarantees believers will interpret randomness as divine will, or consider how many religions claim to have a special revelation, the final truth revealed by their prophet, their book, their culture. Yet there are thousands of such final revelations, each contradicting the next, all supposedly inspired by the same universal creator. If that were true, then this God is either deliberately misleading humanity or incapable of clarity. Neither option fits the description of perfection that believers insist on. Some faiths try to solve this by saying different paths lead to the same truth, but that collapses the moment you compare them. They can't all be true because their core claims cancel each other out. One says there are many gods, another says only one. One says salvation is faith, another says it's deeds, another says it's submission. When everything is the truth, the word loses meaning. Even the idea of eternal life, one of religion's most persuasive promises, falls apart when examined logically. Eternal consciousness sounds appealing until you actually picture it. Never-ending existence with no new challenges, no change, no possibility of death. What begins as paradise eventually becomes a loop, the static eternity, where meaning erodes because nothing ever ends. The finiteness of life is what gives it value. Remove that, and purpose dissolves into monotony. Religions often try to moralize their supernatural claims, attaching ethical rules to metaphysical ideas. Do good and you'll go to heaven. Disobey and you'll suffer forever. But morality built on reward and punishment isn't morality. It's conditioning. A person who helps others only to earn paradise isn't good. They're transactional. The same goes for those who avoid wrongdoing only to dodge hell. True morality doesn't need divine surveillance. It needs empathy. And yet, so many people grow up under the idea that they're constantly being watched by a being who not only sees what they do, but what they think. That's not spirituality, that's psychological control. It installs guilt as a permanent background process. It's not enough to behave. You have to believe. It's like living with an invisible judge in your head who never leaves, never sleeps, and never forgives fully. Then there's the claim that humans are special, that the universe was made for us. But that's only comforting until you look at the numbers. We occupy a microscopic corner of a galaxy among billions of galaxies in a universe that's mostly empty space and lethal radiation. If the cosmos were designed for us, it's an incredibly wasteful design. A designer that builds a universe 99.999% uninhabitable just to host one species on one small planet doesn't sound efficient. It sounds indifferent. Even when believers try to adapt religion to modern times, the contradictions persist. Some say God works through evolution, but that just pushes the problem back. If evolution is how life developed, then nature, not God, did the work. Random mutation and natural selection explain biodiversity without invoking divine supervision. Saying God guided evolution is like saying a painter guided the wind to create a sand dune. It's an unnecessary addition. Religious claims also depend heavily on authority. It's true because the scripture says so, or because the prophet said so. But that's not evidence, it's repetition. When you trace the origins of sacred texts, you find oral traditions passed down, edited, mistranslated, politicized, entire verses added or removed for social control. The Bible, the Quran, the Vedas, all of them reflect the time and culture of their authors. They contain their biases, their fears, their limited understanding of nature, yet people still call them eternal truth. You start to see how easily divine truth becomes a tool for human power. Kings, priests, and preachers have all used it to justify their authority, claim divine backing, and suddenly no one can question you. You're not enforcing your will, you're enforcing God's. It's the oldest political trick in the book, literally. There's a reason why most religions discourage independent interpretation, because if everyone read the text without guidance, the illusion of unity would crumble. That's why interpretation becomes institutionalized. People are told what the verses really mean, often by men whose power depends on being the gatekeepers of meaning. The more absurd the claim, the more aggressively it's defended. Religious claims about divine love are especially hollow when contrasted with reality. We're told that a benevolent God watches over everyone, yet the world runs on indifference. Disasters strike at random. Disease spares no one, and cruelty often goes unpunished. If a human behaved like this, claiming love while allowing chaos, they'd be called negligent, not divine. But religion teaches us to redefine love until it can excuse anything. Even the idea of sin, so central to most religions, is a strange invention. It takes ordinary human behavior, natural instincts, and turns them into offenses against the universe. Desire becomes impurity. Curiosity becomes rebellion. Pleasure becomes shame. It's a system that creates guilt, then sells forgiveness. It tells you that you're broken, so you'll keep coming back to the ones who claim to fix you. When you realize that, the illusion starts to unravel. You begin to see religion not as an explanation, but as an emotional contract. You give up doubt, and in return, you get comfort. You silence your questions, and you're promised the eternal peace. But the peace depends on staying asleep, because the moment you wake up, when you actually look at the claims with an open mind, they dissolve. And that's the quiet turning point for so many. They don't walk away from religion out of rebellion. They just stop being able to pretend. The stories no longer add up, the evidence never appears, and the rules start to feel less like wisdom and more like control. What's left is freedom, not the loud, defiant kind, but a calm one. The kind that comes from realizing you don't need invisible permission to live, love, or think. You can build meaning from the ground up, not from ancient texts down. Every person who reaches that point does it in their own way, sometimes gradually, sometimes suddenly, but it always starts with the same realization that the claims that once demanded faith now demand evidence. And when evidence never arrives, faith quietly fades. And maybe that's the real story beneath all the nonsense religious claims. Not that people are foolish for believing, but that they were never really given the tools to question. Once they are, belief has nowhere to hide because truth doesn't need protection and reason doesn't require worship. It just needs honesty. When you finally start thinking without the safety net of belief, something shifts. You stop looking for cosmic permission slips. You stop waiting for invisible validation. You start noticing how much of what religion calls truth is actually designed to keep people compliant. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. Many religious claims sound harmless until you realize their implications. Take the claim that life's purpose is to serve God. At first, it sounds noble, like devotion or humility. But what it really says is that your life doesn't belong to you, that your thoughts, your choices, even your happiness are secondary to the desires of a being whose existence no one can prove. It's ownership disguised as love. And when a society accepts that idea, it becomes easy to control. That same mindset shapes morality too. If good means obedience to divine command, then anything can be justified. Genocide, slavery, holy wars, all excused because God said so. That's the danger of moral systems built on authority instead of empathy. They can't evolve because questioning them becomes heresy. Religious claims about gender and sexuality are another area where dogma exposes its human origins. The insistence that men lead and women submit, that love must fit one narrow model, that natural human variation is sinful, it all reflects the biases of ancient patriarchal societies, not divine wisdom. These weren't heavenly insights. They were cultural control mechanisms, and they persist because religion disguises old prejudice as eternal truth. The more you study these claims, the clearer it becomes that religion operates on emotional logic, not rational logic. It promises certainty in exchange for surrender. It offers comfort in exchange for conformity, and it calls that transaction faith. But faith, in that sense, is just trust without evidence, something no one would accept in any other part of life. You wouldn't board a plane whose pilot says, "I can't prove it'll fly, but have faith." Yet when it comes to gods, people accept that standard without question. Another contradiction that's hard to ignore is how religions claim universality but depend on geography. If you're born in one country, you'll likely believe one God, born elsewhere, a completely different one. People inherit their truth by accident of birth. That alone should raise suspicion because if there were one universal divine truth, it shouldn't depend on postal codes. Then there's the claim that suffering makes people stronger, that tragedy is divine training. But the world doesn't work like that. Suffering breaks people as often as it builds them. It isn't distributed fairly or meaningfully, it's random. It doesn't test the wicked more than the kind, or the strong more than the weak. It just happens. Saying it's God's test is a way to feel less powerless in a chaotic world, but it's not an explanation. And when you start to recognize that pattern, that religion fills emotional gaps with unverifiable claims, you begin to see how it maintains itself. The comfort it provides makes people overlook its inconsistencies. It gives meaning, not because the claims are true, but because they feel needed. Yet needing something doesn't make it real. Consider how religions handle doubt. Instead of addressing it with evidence, they turn it into sin. Doubt becomes the enemy. Curiosity, the temptation. Believers are told that questioning their faith means they're being tested or under attack. That's not spiritual guidance. It's psychological armor. It keeps people from ever walking out of the maze. You can see this in the way religious communities treat apostasy. Those who leave, they're often shunned, labeled as lost, or accused of pride. The message is clear. It's safer to stay inside the illusion than risk being alone outside it. That fear keeps countless people tied to beliefs they no longer find credible. And yet, despite all this control, Religion can't stop truth from leaking through. Science, history, and reason have eroded its foundation step by step. The earth isn't flat, or the universe isn't young. Disease isn't demonic. Thunder isn't divine anger. The list of claims debunked by knowledge is endless. But instead of admitting error, religions adapt. They reinterpret. What was literal becomes metaphorical. What was absolute becomes symbolic. It's a slow retreat disguised as revelation. That adaptability is both its strength and its weakness. It allows religion to survive, but only by shedding parts of itself. Over time, it's forced to abandon more and more ground to reason, and the more it concedes, the clearer it becomes that it never held truth in the first place. It only held tradition. There's a quiet irony here. The very traits religion taught people to suppress, curiosity, skepticism, independent thought, are the ones that lead to genuine understanding. When you apply those traits to the world, you get progress. When you apply them to religion, you get heresy. Yet both paths lead to the same destination, clarity. Some believers say faith and reason can coexist, but that depends on redefining faith. If faith means trust built on evidence, then yes, they can coexist. But if faith means belief without evidence, they're opposites. One begins where the other ends, and the more you think about it, the more you see how religion depends on fear, the fear of death, of uncertainty, of insignificance. It offers escape from those fears through stories. Heaven for comfort, hell for motivation, destiny for control. It's all carefully structured to make the human condition feel less chaotic. But the price is your intellectual honesty. When you remove that framework, something beautiful happens. You stop needing invisible guarantees. Death stops being a punishment and becomes part of life. Meaning stops being dictated and becomes discovered. You stop living for an afterlife and start living fully in this one. Religious claims often tell you the universe is built around you, and that a cosmic intelligence cares deeply about your daily thoughts and actions. But when you look at the night sky and realize how vast it all is, you see that the truth is actually more humbling and more awe-inspiring. The universe doesn't revolve around us, and yet we get to exist within it. That's not meaningless. It's miraculous in a real evidence-based way. The absurdity of religious claims isn't just in their contradictions, it's in how small they make reality seem. They shrink the universe into a stage for moral drama. They turn existence into a test. But reality doesn't need that kind of story. It's already magnificent on its own. That's what makes people finally step away. Not rebellion, not bitterness. Just the realization that they don't need mythology to feel wonder. They don't need divine permission to be moral. They don't need supernatural promises to find peace. When you get there, the nonsense starts to sound like noise. You stop trying to decode contradictions, stop defending the indefensible, and start appreciating the world as it is, complex, uncertain, temporary, and real. You begin to understand that the truest reverence isn't worship, it's awareness. Awareness of reality, of truth, of the extraordinary fact that you exist at all. And maybe that's the most honest way to live, not by believing the unbelievable, but by learning, questioning, and caring without needing a cosmic scoreboard. Because meaning doesn't come from faith, it comes from freedom. There's something quietly powerful about reaching that point of freedom. You stop fighting to defend what doesn't make sense. You stop pretending that contradictions are deep truths or that mystery equals meaning. Instead, you start valuing clarity, evidence, and honesty, even when they don't give you comforting answers. That's when the spell breaks. When you hear religious claims, after that, they sound different. Everything happens for a reason, no longer feels wise. It feels evasive. God works in mysterious ways, sounds like a way to avoid saying we don't know. And faith will set you free begins to sound like don't ask too many questions. And the phrase that once felt profound now feel hollow because you can finally hear what they really mean. It's not that people who believe are foolish. It's that belief often starts before understanding. Most of us are taught what to believe before we're old enough to question why. And by the time we can question, the beliefs are already tied to identity, family, and fear. So when someone starts doubting, it feels like they're not just questioning ideas, they're betraying people, culture, and community. That emotional cost is what keeps many inside religion long after they've stopped believing the claims. But even then, the cracks remain. The contradictions don't go away, they just get buried under ritual and repetition. The claim that prayer changes outcomes sits next to the claim that everything is predestined. The claim that God is merciful sits next to eternal damnation. The claim that truth is absolute sits next to the endless reinterpretations of holy books. These contradictions don't coexist, they cancel each other out, but most people are too afraid to look too closely. The moment you start applying the same critical standards to a religion that you use for everything else, the illusion collapses. If a friend told you a talking snake convinced their ancestors to eat fruit that cursed humanity, you'd call it mythology. If someone said a man walked on water or came back from the dead, you'd demand evidence. Yet when those same claims are wrapped in centuries of reverence, people nod solemnly and call it faith. The double standard is what exposes the weakness of these claims. They only survive under special treatment. Remove that, and they fall apart like any other unfounded idea. And yet, religion continues to insist that without it, life would have no foundation, that without divine law, chaos would reign. But look around. Moral progress has always come from those who challenged religious authority, not those who obeyed it. Abolitionists, scientists, reformers, all moved society forward by questioning sacred claims. The moral arc bends toward justice not because of divine will, but because of human empathy and reason. Another thing that becomes obvious once you step outside belief is how deeply religion depends on language tricks. Words like faith, soul, and sin are powerful because they sound meaningful even when they're undefined. They create emotional resonance while hiding logical emptiness. Ask 10 believers to define soul, and you'll get 10 different answers, all vague, poetic, and circular. That's not knowledge, it's storytelling. Some claims even contradict the basic laws of logic, but survive because they're framed as mystery. The idea that God is both three in one, that he's all-powerful but limited by free will, that he's invisible but manifests in history, and it's all treated as profound, but it's really just incoherent. Mystery is the word religion uses when reason stops working. The same goes for the claim that sacred texts contain eternal truths. Yet every generation cherry-picks the parts that fit modern morality and quietly ignores the rest. When slavery, stoning, or holy war become indefensible, they're rebranded as symbolic. If divine morality changes every few centuries, maybe it was human morality all along. There's also the claim that religion gives people hope, but hope built on falsehood isn't hope, it's dependence. It's like promising someone wings in the afterlife so they never learn to walk on their own. Real hope comes from understanding reality and working within it, not from waiting for rescue from above. One of the most revealing aspects of religious thinking is how it handles contradiction. When evidence challenges belief, the belief shifts, not because it's proven wrong, but because it refuses to die. It mutates into something less testable, more emotional. God doesn't do miracles anymore because faith has weakened. He doesn't reveal himself directly because it would violate free will. The excuses evolve to keep the core belief alive, even when reality has moved on. The same pattern appears across every religion, across every culture. Supernatural claims shrink as understanding grows. Every mystery that once required divine explanation now has a natural one. Thunder, disease, mental illness, eclipses, fertility, all once called acts of God, now understood by science. There's no sign that this trend will stop. The unknowns of today become the discoveries of tomorrow, and religion keeps retreating into the shadows left behind. At a certain point, you realize that what's left of religion isn't explanation, it's nostalgia. People cling to it because it connects them to tradition, community, and comfort, but those are human needs, not divine ones. You don't need supernatural claims to feel awe or connection. You just need honesty about where those feelings come from. And when you start to live from that place where you don't need to force meaning or justify reality through myth, You feel something that's often mistaken for faith, but it's really clarity, the same sense of wonder without the delusion, and the same moral compassion without the fear of punishment, the same gratitude without worship. It's not about rejecting spirituality, it's about redefining it, about finding depth and awe in truth itself, because reality, as it truly is, doesn't need to be dressed up to be extraordinary. And that's what makes the nonsense religious claims so revealing. They show how desperate humans are for certainty, even when it comes at the cost of reason. They expose the lengths to which people will go to preserve belief, how they'll twist language, ignore contradictions, and suppress doubt, but they also show something hopeful, that belief requires maintenance, while truth stands on its own. Once you stop repeating the claims and start testing them, you begin to see that nothing divine was ever required. The universe operates on laws, not wishes. Morality arises from empathy, not commandments. And meaning comes from experience, not prophecy. That realization doesn't lead to despair, it leads to empowerment. Because when you stop waiting for the supernatural, you start realizing what humans are actually capable of. You realize that the kindness, knowledge, and creativity aren't divine gifts, they're human achievements. That progress doesn't come from prayer, it comes from effort. That love doesn't need validation from above, it's enough that it exists here between us. And that's when you finally understand the full absurdity of those religious claims. Not just that they're false, but that they've been distracting us from something much greater. The truth that reality itself, unfiltered and unembellished, is far more profound than any story ever written about it. You don't need miracles when existence itself is miraculous. You don't need gods when the universe already gives you wonder, connection, and meaning, if you're brave enough to look for them honestly. When you begin to see life as it really is, finite, fragile, yet full of possibility, you realize how much of religion's power comes from denying that truth. It promises permanence in a world that changes, certainty in a universe that doesn't care, and control over things that are simply beyond control. It sells immortality because it's terrified of impermanence, but impermanence isn't tragedy. It's the reason anything matters at all. Think about it. If life never ended, nothing would have urgency. Love would lose its weight, beauty, its sharpness. It's because moments end that we cherish them. Death doesn't make life meaningless, it gives it shape. But religion flips that truth, turning fear of death into the foundation of its entire system. Believe or face eternal punishment. Follow, and you'll live forever. It's not enlightenment. It's emotional blackmail disguised as salvation. Another layer of nonsense comes from the claim that humans are inherently sinful, that we're born broken and can only be fixed through obedience. That idea doesn't describe reality. It manufactures dependence. It tells people they're unworthy, then offers them a way to feel worthy again. For a price, it's an ancient marketing strategy for guilt, and it works because guilt is a powerful form of control. But look closer at that claim. If humans are made in God's image and humans are flawed, then what does that say about the image? If imperfection is part of creation, then it was part of the plan. So either the creator is incompetent or the story doesn't hold up. You can't have a perfect being making imperfect beings and then punishing them for being exactly as designed. That contradiction is everywhere once you start looking. A God who knows everything but still gets angry, who creates a devil just to condemn him, who demands proof of love through suffering. These aren't qualities of perfection, they're reflections of human emotion projected upward. Religion takes our flaws, anger, jealousy, pride, and calls them divine when they're attached to a deity. It's mythology wearing a halo. When you see it in the way believers describe their God as loving, yet wrathful, merciful, yet just, infinite, yet deeply concerned with what humans eat, wear, or love. These contradictions don't reveal complexity. They reveal confusion. They're what happens when ancient minds tried to explain morality and nature before understanding either. And that's really what religion is. Humanity's first attempt to explain the unexplained. It began as stories around fires long before writing, long before science. It tried to answer the biggest questions: why we're here, where we go, what causes the storms and stars. But those guesses hardened into dogma, and dogma stopped evolving even when knowledge did. That's why religious claims today sound so absurd. They're fossilized fragments of early human imagination, still treated as truth. Even when religion tries to sound modern, it can't escape that core. The language changes, the rituals adapt, but the logic stays the same. Faith over evidence, obedience over inquiry, comfort over clarity. It's a cycle of inherited assumptions passed from one generation to the next. Most people don't even realize they're defending ideas older than the wheel. You start to wonder how much of belief survives simply because it's never been confronted directly. Most people hear these claims as children, long before they can analyze them. By the time they're old enough to think critically, belief has fused with identity, and questioning it feels like questioning themselves. That's why so many cling to contradictions. They're protecting not just an idea, but a sense of self. But when that wall finally cracks, when someone dares to look past the fear, the collapse of belief isn't chaos, it's clarity. It's like waking up in a room you didn't realize was dimly lit. The world doesn't shrink, it expands. The mystery doesn't vanish, it becomes real. You start appreciating the universe not as a stage built for you, but as a vast and different, breathtaking reality that you're lucky to witness for a brief moment. That realization changes everything. You stop needing divine permission to feel awe. You stop confusing authority with truth. You stop mistaking obedience for virtue. You start realizing that morality, meaning, and wonder don't require a God. They require attention. And yet, even in that freedom, there's empathy because you understand why belief exists. Life is uncertain, pain is inevitable, and people want something to hold on to. Religion offers a sense of control in a chaotic world. It gives simple answers to complex questions. It promises that suffering isn't meaningless, that death isn't final. Those promises are comforting, but comfort isn't the same as truth. If a claim can't survive without fear, guilt, or emotional manipulation, it doesn't deserve to be called truth. And that's the thread that runs through nearly every religious doctrine. The need to keep followers from asking why too loudly. Because the moment they do, the illusion begins to fade. There's a reason why religious institutions have historically feared education and free thought. Knowledge breaks dependence. When people learn how nature works, they stop needing miracles. When they learn history, they see how myths evolve. When they learn ethics, they realize morality doesn't need divine approval. Knowledge is the great exorcist. It drives out the ghosts of superstition. That's why every major step forward in human progress, science, philosophy, human rights, has faced resistance from religion, not because truth and faith are natural enemies, but because truth threatens control. If people stop believing nonsense, they stop obeying those who profit from it. And yet, despite that resistance, truth keeps advancing, slowly, quietly, sometimes painfully. But it advances. It doesn't need temples, prophets, or rituals. It just needs open minds. When you start seeing religion through that lens, not as evil, but as outdated, you realize how unnecessary its claims have become. We don't need divine punishment to enforce morality. We have empathy and reason. We don't need heavenly reward to appreciate life. We have love, curiosity, and connection. We don't need cosmic authority to tell us we matter. We make ourselves matter by what we do here, now. The biggest irony of all is that religion tries to make people small, to tell them they're nothing without God, when the truth is the opposite. The human mind, unaided by faith, has built civilization, cured disease, decoded the stars, and explored the fabric of reality itself. That's not hubris, it's evolution, fulfilling its potential. We are not fallen beings in need of redemption. We are rising beings, learning to see clearly. The nonsense claims that once confined us are fading, one by one, as light replaces shadow. And what's left is not emptiness, it's possibility. So maybe the end of belief isn't the end of meaning. Maybe it's the beginning of understanding. When you no longer cling to myths for comfort, you can finally stand in truth. Not the easy kind, but the honest kind. The kind that doesn't promise eternity, but offers something far more precious, the chance to live fully awake for the brief, astonishing time you're here. When you reach that state of awareness, where superstition finally loses its grip, there's a quiet peace that follows, not the kind promised by religion, but the kind that comes from finally accepting reality as it is, imperfect, unpredictable, but breathtakingly real. You start noticing that wonder doesn't disappear. When belief does, it expands. You no longer need invisible miracles to feel awe. You find it in the way atoms form everything you see, in the way stars live and die, in the way consciousness somehow emerges from biology. There's poetry in truth, even without myth. In fact, it's purer that way, because it doesn't depend on illusion. The great irony is that religion tries to make people feel humble before creation, yet it's often the most arrogant explanation ever proposed. It assumes the entire universe was made for one species on one small planet, that cosmic forces revolve around human morality, that the creator of galaxies is deeply invested in dietary rules and prayer schedules. That's not humility. That's cosmic narcissism. Real humility comes from accepting that we're not the center of anything, and yet we still matter because we can reflect, feel, and understand. It's not divine design that gives us meaning. It's our capacity to create it. Another religious claim that dissolves under scrutiny is that people need divine forgiveness to move forward. That idea turns human error into spiritual debt. It says you can't be free until someone invisible releases you. But forgiveness isn't cosmic. It's psychological. It's something humans give to each other and to themselves. You don't need supernatural approval to make peace with your past. The same goes for gratitude. Religion claims gratitude belongs to God, but gratitude is richer when it's directed toward the real and toward the people who help you, the world that sustains you, the chance to exist at all. You don't have to thank a creator to feel grateful. You can thank existence itself and all its fragile beauty. One of the most telling signs of religion's decline is that its claims have become defensive. Once they declared absolute truth, now they plead for coexistence. Once they punished heresy, now they rebrand it as personal spiritual journeys. Religion survives by softening its edges because it can't win on logic anymore. So it shifts from commanding to comforting, from believe or burn to believe if it helps. It's evolution by desperation. But that softening reveals something profound. It shows that even religion can't resist the slow pressure of truth. The more the world learns, the more it has to adapt or fade. The old gods are retreating not through violence, but through understanding. Every scientific discovery, every social advancement, every act of compassion grounded in reason makes the old claims harder to defend. That's why so many religious authorities now emphasize personal faith over doctrine. It's a survival tactic. When the external claims collapse under scrutiny, they retreat into the subjective. You can't disprove my experience, they say, and they're right, you can't. But personal feeling isn't evidence of universal truth. It just proves that the human brain is capable of powerful emotions, not that those emotions correspond to reality. Another subtle shift is how religion tries to borrow credibility from science. Phrases like intelligent design, fine-tuning, or theistic evolution are attempts to keep old beliefs alive under new names. But dressing mythology in scientific language doesn't make it true. It just makes it harder to see where reason ends and wishful thinking begins. And yet, beneath all that noise, the same human longing remains, the desire for meaning, connection, purpose. Religion didn't invent that, it just monopolized it. But once you realize those needs can be met without superstition, the monopoly breaks. You can build meaning through creativity, empathy, discovery, through living honestly rather than believing blindly. When you let go of supernatural claims, morality becomes clearer too. It's no longer about obeying invisible orders. It's about reducing harm and increasing well-being. It's about what actually makes life better, not what ancient texts declare. That kind of morality doesn't need divine oversight. It just needs understanding and compassion. That's what people often misunderstand about those who move beyond belief. It's not about rejecting morality or beauty. It's about finding them in reality where they actually belong. It's about replacing borrowed certainty with earned understanding. Some will say that without religion, life loses comfort. And yes, in a way it does, but it replaces comfort with clarity. And clarity is a different kind of peace. It's quieter, but more honest. It doesn't hide from pain or death. It accepts them as part of the deal. It doesn't need paradise to justify kindness. It sees kindness as its own reward. Religious claims collapse not because they're attacked, but because they can't keep up. Knowledge moves forward, evidence accumulates, contradictions grow. Belief requires stillness, but the world keeps turning. And no matter how passionately people defend nonsense, reality always wins in the end. There's a certain beauty in that inevitability because it means humanity is capable of growth, capable of outgrowing myths without losing wonder, capable of facing the unknown without inventing gods to fill it. The people who see through nonsense claims don't become empty. They become free to think, to question, to explore without fear of eternal consequences, free to live with uncertainty instead of pretending to have all the answers, free to find peace not in promises but in presence. And once you reach that point, you realize that truth, even when uncomfortable, is kinder than illusion. Because truth doesn't demand worship. It doesn't threaten punishment. It doesn't divide people into chosen and damned. It simply is. That's the quiet revolution that happens when belief dissolves. It's not loud, not angry. It's just people opening their eyes, seeing that the universe doesn't need a manager and that existence doesn't need a reason beyond itself. In the end, the most powerful response to nonsense religious claims isn't mockery. It's understanding, because understanding reveals the real story, that every god, every myth, every sacred rule was written by people just like us, trying to make sense of what they didn't yet know. And now that we do know, we can thank them for their effort and move forward into a world where curiosity is sacred, evidence is worship, and truth, whatever it turns out to be, is enough. Because when you no longer need to believe the unbelievable, you're finally free to experience reality in full, without filters, without fear, and without the weight of claims that never made sense to begin with. And once you've seen through it all, once you've stepped outside the walls of belief and felt the open air of reason, you can never quite go back. The language of religion, its promises, its threats, its grand declarations, starts to sound like echoes from another era, an era where ignorance was inevitable and fear filled the spaces where knowledge now lives. You start to notice how fragile those claims always were. They needed repetition to survive. They needed ritual, community, emotional pressure. Because without constant reinforcement, they collapse under their own contradictions. Faith needs to be fed, truth doesn't. And when you compare those claims to reality, you see how small they really are. A world governed by invisible commands, cosmic tests, and eternal judgments is a narrow stage for something as vast as existence. The real universe, the one revealed by observation and reason, is infinitely larger, older, and more intricate than any story written about it. Religion tried to make the universe human-sized, but the truth made humans cosmic. The claim that we're helpless without divine guidance is one of the most destructive of all. It tells people they're too weak to think for themselves, too flawed to trust their instincts, too small to find purpose on their own. But history proves the opposite. Every leap forward came from those who refused to wait for guidance from above. Every breakthrough, every act of compassion, every moment of progress, human, all the way down. And that's what's so liberating once you see through the nonsense. You realize you don't have to wait for permission to seek truth or love deeply or live fully. You don't have to earn existence. It's already yours. You don't need forgiveness for being human. You just need understanding. Religion's greatest illusion is that without it, life would be meaningless. But the truth is, Life without superstition becomes more meaningful, not less. Because meaning isn't handed down. It's created through choice, through action, through connection. When you stop living for eternity, you start living for now. And now becomes precious. You also start noticing how many religious claims rely on reversing reality. They call questioning pride and submission humility. They call evidence temptation and blind belief virtue. They praise obedience as moral strength and curiosity as moral weakness. It's a brilliant inversion, one that keeps minds subdued by convincing them that doubt is sin. But doubt is not sin. It's sanity. It's the spark that drives every discovery humanity has ever made. Once that spark is allowed to grow, it doesn't stop at religion. It questions everything. It asks whether authority deserves obedience, whether tradition deserves reverence, whether belief deserves immunity from proof, and that's why religion fears it. Because once people start thinking freely, control fades. Another claim that crumbles quickly under reason is the idea that moral order requires divine command, as if empathy, fairness, and kindness would vanish without heavenly supervision. But moral behavior isn't a religious invention, it's a social one. It evolved because cooperation helped us survive. Long before scripture, long before prophets, people cared for each other because it made life better. The golden rule wasn't written, it was discovered through experience. That's the real foundation of morality, not divine decree, but shared humanity. And when you ground ethics in reason and compassion instead of ancient authority, it actually becomes stronger, not weaker. You can update it as understanding grows, you can fix it when it fails, you can admit when you're wrong. Religion can't do that. Its morality is frozen, and so it cracks with time. You start realizing that the true nonsense isn't just in the supernatural stories, it's in the idea that perfection exists at all, that there's a single eternal truth handed down to humanity. The beauty of reality is that it's unfinished, it's evolving, learning, changing, just like us. That's not chaos, that's growth. And when you embrace that, you stop craving the illusion of absolute answers. You become comfortable with not knowing. You see mystery not as a threat, but as invitation, because the unknown doesn't mean unknowable. It means unexplored. Religion tries to close that door with final claims. This is the truth, no more questions. But truth doesn't work that way. The moment you close the door to inquiry, you lock yourself inside illusion and call it peace. Peace isn't found in certainty. It's found in curiosity without fear. It's in learning, adapting, evolving. It's in facing reality without needing to distort it into a story where everything is about you. Because that's the core of every religious claim, the assumption that humans are the main characters, that everything, galaxies, time, morality, exists for us. But the more we learn, the clearer it becomes that we're not the center of anything, and yet somehow that makes our existence even more meaningful, because meaning that survives without privilege is real. Think about that. We're temporary creatures on a pale blue dot, orbiting an ordinary star in one galaxy among billions. And somehow we've evolved the ability to reflect on our own existence, to ask questions, to seek truth. That's not divine, it's miraculous in the truest sense. When you stop viewing the world through superstition, you realize that meaning doesn't have to be eternal to be profound. The fleeting nature of life makes every moment sacred in its own way. A sunrise, a laugh, a shared kindness. They don't need divine validation. They just need to be noticed. That's the great irony of leaving religion behind. You lose the false promise of eternity, but you gain the full presence of now. You stop worshiping what might come after and start loving what's here. And that's why nonsense religious claims don't just collapse under logic. They dissolve under experience. Once you've lived fully, loved deeply, and seen the world as it really is, you don't need cosmic stories to make it meaningful. Reality becomes enough. You begin to see that awe isn't found in submission, it's found in awareness, that reverence doesn't belong to gods, it belongs to existence itself. that truth, once accepted, doesn't make life smaller, it makes it vast. And in that vastness, you realize something religion could never give you, that freedom and wonder aren't opposites. They're the same thing, because to be free is to see clearly. And to see clearly is to finally understand just how extraordinary reality already is. When you reach that point of clarity, everything feels different, not emptier, but lighter. Like you've set down a weight you didn't even know you were carrying, the weight of explanations that never made sense, the weight of guilt for simply existing, the weight of pretending to know what no one knows. You realize that certainty was never peace. It was a cage. Religion promised security, but it came at the cost of freedom. It told you what to think, what to value, what to fear. It built boundaries around your mind and called them truth. But once those boundaries fall, you begin to understand that real peace doesn't come from having all the answers. It comes from no longer needing them. The world suddenly feels bigger, not because something was added, but because illusions were removed. You look at a night sky and feel genuine awe, not because you think someone painted it for you, but because it exists, vast and indifferent, and you're part of it for a brief, miraculous moment. The nonsense claims of religion begin to look like what they've always been, attempts to shrink infinity into a human shape. Stories meant to make people feel safe in a universe that doesn't explain itself, understandable once, but unnecessary now. You can appreciate religion as a stage in our species' growth, a set of myths that helped us navigate fear before we understood the world. It was a child's map, creative, emotional, and limited, but we're not children anymore, and clinging to those maps now only keeps us lost. What's striking is how similar the core of every religion really is: promises of immortality, rewards for obedience, threats for disobedience, explanations for suffering, and a hierarchy that keeps power in human hands by claiming divine authority. Different symbols, same pattern. The details change, but the psychological structure stays the same. It's always about control disguised as comfort. And that control doesn't need to be overt to be effective. It works quietly through language, culture, and fear. You don't have to be chained if you've been taught to feel guilty for being free. That's how belief perpetuates itself. Not through evidence, but through emotional conditioning. But reason untangles those knots. Slowly, carefully, it replaces fear with understanding. And once understanding arrives, belief loses its grip. Because you can't unknow what you've learned. You can't unsee the contradictions once you've noticed them. You begin to question everything you once accepted. Why should love require divine approval? Why should morality depend on ancient authority? Why should meaning require eternal reward? And why should truth need faith to survive? Every one of those questions exposes the same thing, that religion's power comes not from truth, but from repetition. It's not built on discovery. It's built on conditioning. And once that conditioning fades, all that remains is the raw, honest question. What's actually real? And that question is where real spirituality begins, not the supernatural kind, but the human kind. The sense of connection, curiosity, and humility that comes from knowing how small we are and how much there is to learn. You start finding meaning in places religion never taught you to look, in music, in art, in friendship, in science, in the quiet understanding between two people. You find wonder in reality's complexity instead of escaping it through dogma. It's not that belief disappears overnight. It lingers in habits and memories and phrases, but it stops being sacred. It becomes something you can look at from the outside, an artifact, not an identity. You can study it, even appreciate its history without needing to submit to it, and that distance gives you perspective. You see how much harm those nonsense claims have caused, not because people are evil, but because they trusted authority more than evidence. Wars fought over invisible kingdoms, prejudice justified by scripture, guilt taught as virtue, time wasted chasing eternal life instead of living this one. But you also see the lesson in it, that progress doesn't come from certainty. It comes from doubt. Every major human advancement started with someone daring to question what everyone knew. And that same courage is what frees people from belief. Religion says that doubt leads to despair, but in truth, doubt leads to discovery. It's the first honest step toward understanding. And once you take that step, there's no going back to blind acceptance. You start craving real answers, not comforting ones. And those answers are everywhere, waiting in the way life evolves, in the way stars are born and die, in the way human consciousness arose from matter. None of it requires supernatural intervention. It's all the result of natural laws so intricate they inspire more wonder than any scripture could. You realize that truth doesn't need to flatter you to be beautiful. It doesn't need to tell you you're chosen or watched or destined. It just is vast, indifferent, magnificent. And being part of it, however briefly, is enough. That's the quiet, liberating conclusion that follows when you strip away nonsense religious claims. You don't lose meaning, you find real meaning. You don't lose morality, you find grounded morality. You don't lose awe, you find deeper awe. You stop asking what a God wants from you and start asking what you can create, contribute, and understand. You stop worrying about being judged after death and start focusing on how you live while you're here. And maybe that's the most profound shift of all, the realization that the greatest act of reverence isn't worship, it's awareness. To see reality clearly and still choose to care, to love, to build, to learn. When you live that way, you're not rebelling against religion. You're simply stepping beyond it. You're choosing truth over tradition, clarity over comfort, and understanding over illusion. And when enough people do that quietly, thoughtfully, consistently, the world begins to change, not through conquest or conversion, but through illumination. The old stories fade not because they're banned, but because they're no longer needed. People begin to realize that life without superstition isn't empty, it's authentic. That morality without fear isn't weak, it's genuine. That awe without gods isn't lesser, it's purer. And maybe one day, when belief has finally loosened its hold, humanity will look back on these religious claims and see them for what they were, early drafts of our search for truth, valuable once, but outgrown now, and in their place will be something better, not worship, but understanding, not submission, but curiosity, not faith, but freedom. Because that's the real destination of this journey, not heaven, not enlightenment, but awareness. The kind that sees nonsense for what it is, truth for what it's worth, and life for what it truly is, brief, uncertain, and utterly extraordinary. And when you finally arrive at that place, when all the noise of superstition fades into the background and only reality remains, there's a kind of silence that feels fuller than any sermon ever could, not an absence, but a presence. The presence of truth, unfiltered, unforced. You start to see that what religion tried to imitate with its claims, the promise of meaning, connection, transcendence, was already there in life itself. It didn't need to be invented or sanctified. It was always woven into existence, the way a child laughs, the way time changes you, the way sunlight hits the ocean and reminds you that you're parts of something ancient and vast. Religion told you those feelings were proof of the divine, but they were proof of being alive. They were moments when consciousness met reality and recognized its own impermanence. That's what made them sacred, not because they pointed to heaven, but because they happened here, now. And when you finally let go of the nonsense, when you stop needing invisible guarantees, you realize how powerful that is. Life stops being a waiting room for eternity and becomes a story that's actually yours, not written by prophets, not dictated by gods, but authored by you. You start to understand morality in a deeper way too, not as obedience to commandments, but as empathy and action. You help not because you're told to, but because you understand what it means to suffer. You forgive not because it earns you reward, but because it frees you. You love not because it's divine, but because it's human. The simplicity of that truth makes the old claims feel hollow. The idea that good only exists through fear of punishment or hope of paradise becomes almost insulting to what people are capable of. As if the only way to act with kindness is to expect payment. But real kindness doesn't need witnesses. It doesn't need eternity. It just needs honesty. And honesty is the one thing religion could never fully handle, because it survives through illusion, through pretending that questions are answers, that stories are facts, that authority equals truth. But honesty breaks illusion like light breaks shadow. Once you let that light in, you start noticing how much beauty religion missed while looking for meaning in the sky. It ignored the miracle of existence itself, the fact that matter organized itself into consciousness capable of asking why. It missed the real wonder that from chaos came chemistry, from chemistry came life, and from life came awareness that can look back at the stars and understand them. No myth, no holy book, no divine claim can compete with that, because it's not fantasy, it's truth. And truth doesn't require worship to be amazing. You begin to see that the purpose of life isn't given, it's chosen. It's not found in prayer, it's built through action. It's not promised, it's practiced. Every act of kindness, every moment of curiosity, every bit of courage to face reality instead of retreating into stories, that's purpose. And even though you know your time is short, that doesn't make it bleak. It makes it urgent. It makes every sunrise matter, every conversation matter, every chance to do something meaningful matter. You don't need eternity when you finally understand how much value can exist in a single lifetime. That's what the nonsense religious claims take from people. They replace reality's raw beauty with false certainty. They offer infinite life and steal the meaning of the one you actually have. They promise ultimate truth and distract you from the truths that are right in front of you. But once you step away, you begin to live differently, not for approval, not for salvation, but for awareness. You start measuring life not by divine standards, but by human ones: compassion, understanding, creation, curiosity. And it's in those things, not temples, not scriptures, that the sacred really lives. When you see the world clearly, you stop needing to divide it into holy and unholy. You stop needing to label moments as blessed or cursed. You just live them fully, aware of their impermanence, grateful for their existence. There's a kind of quiet joy that comes with that, a joy that doesn't depend on belief, only on presence. It's the realization that you don't need to be watched to do good or promised eternity to love deeply, that being conscious for this brief, impossible moment in an infinite universe is miracle enough. And when people say that abandoning religion leaves a void, they're half right. It does leave a void, but it's the kind of void that's meant to be filled with knowledge, curiosity, creation, laughter, compassion, with life. Because life itself is the answer religion was always pretending to give. Every breath, every heartbeat, every thought, every act of kindness, it's all part of something vast and self-sustaining, something that doesn't need an author to be meaningful. You stop needing promises of paradise when you realize paradise was always the moment you understood you were alive. And that's where this journey ends, not in disbelief, but in understanding, not in emptiness, but in presence, not in despair, but in clarity. Because the truth isn't that religion failed, it's that humanity outgrew it. We no longer need myths to see meaning. We can face the universe as it is, unafraid, unashamed, and fully awake. And maybe that's what enlightenment really means, not floating above the world, but seeing it clearly, not worshiping creation, but belonging to it. No eternal reward could ever compete with that. Because in the end, the greatest revelation isn't divine, it's human, that awareness itself, fragile and fleeting, is enough, and always was